Today, I'm going to talk about Moterm. I will be uploading regular videos on a lot more reviews, so stay tuned if you are interested in this type of video, and make sure to subscribe to my channel so that you get notification whenever I upload. Okay, so Moterm is a China-based company that mostly sells on AliExpress, Amazon, and smaller sites unofficially, I guess, like the Planner Exchange. Generally on AliExpress, they have their full product range. On Amazon, it's a little bit more limited, and they do have limited stock with them, and it's mostly older models. It's really hard to come by. One of their newer models on Amazon and Planner Exchange just buys them in bulk from AliExpress and then sells them. And since they're a US-based company, you don't have to wait for months to get your shipment, and they generally have the more popular models as well. What do they make? So they do make their original folios. They have the more rugged traveler's notebooks, as well as ring planners in kind of like the same leather. So here I have Hobonichi Weeks folios, B6 size folios, and they also make traveler's notebooks in this like grainy, lychee grain leather, as well as the more rugged traditional traveler's notebook leathers. In addition, they do have a lot of accessories, ring binder accessories. They sell these brass products. I do have some more accessories from them, but they're kind of scattered all over the place, so I'm not going to show you all of them. And so basically they have a lot of stuff. They're more known for their lychee grain items like these ones. And so now I will go just a little bit more in depth about what I think of the quality of the products. And I will be focusing on these specific items because that's what people are mostly interested in, and that's what they're best known for. Most people don't talk about Moterm for their whatever brass rulers. So I will be focusing on these items, and I will use this empty one. I have a Hobonichi Weeks cover, as well as this one as an example. So what I have come up with in terms of kind of leather review is I have a little rubric here that I will use as a guide so that I can make sure that I cover all the things that are relevant to leather planner quality. So first off, we have the leather type. Now, on their website and on their AliExpress page, they say that these are top grain leather. Top grain leather is what I would consider kind of like the second highest quality leathers. I will link a video down below that's a very good explanation, I guess, for the difference between different grades of leathers. And top grain leather is pretty good. I can tell, obviously, that the very top layer of the leather has been removed and completely redone, and that's why you have this kind of like printed lychee grain pattern and absolutely no natural variation. Generally speaking, it's not the top quality rawhides that tanneries would use to make this type of finish and to make top grain leather. So even though it is better than bonded leather, it has actual grains in it. to speak for its sturdiness. It's not the best leather there is, so I'm going to use my friction pen and just give it maybe a D plus for the leather type. I'm a really harsh grader, so just to put this in perspective, I gave something like a C plus, B minus for the full grain leather that Travelers Company uses. So this is not bad. Anything that's an F, so if it's not actual leather, I'm not even gonna grade it. If something that's a bonded leather, like the genuine leather that's kind of just put together with leather particles, I will give it a fail because I do not like that. Anyways, so when it comes to the tannage, this is definitely chrome tanned. For those of you that care about the environment, chrome tanned leather is a little bit more harmful, actually a lot more harmful to the environment. And because of the coating and the kind of like the new refinished top, there's more harmful chemicals and more, I guess, like plastic components that are used to make this leather. So the tannage isn't necessarily great, but I'm just going to put chrome down here just because it is chrome tanned leather with a refinished top. Now let's talk about the leather grade. It applies a little bit more when you can actually see the natural top of the leather. And like I said before, usually when companies make this type of completely redone top with the top grain leather, they're not usually great quality rawhide to begin with. So I'm just going to give it the same D+. It's very arbitrary. Do not take this seriously, but that's just kind of what I think of it. It's not great leather. It is a top grain leather, and now let's just keep that in mind. This week's folio is only about $35. So we're not expecting anything phenomenal for that price range anyways. The only thing I would note is that because the Moterm planners haven't been around for that long, and we don't know how this leather behaves over time, there is a possibility, I'm not saying that it won't happen, but there is a possibility that with constant use and time, the top might start to peel. Now, it will be great if it doesn't happen, but we don't know. So take that into consideration. Now, when it comes to if I think the leather, and actually since this planner has a long non-leather component, let's talk about it too. The inside of this folio, like inside the pockets, are kind of lined with this synthetic material. Unlike some other companies that might line this with a thin layer of leather, this is just some really thin kind of plasticky fabric. There are some pros and cons for this. I would say the good thing about it is a lot of companies like Louis Vuitton that would line the inside with some plasticky material and a layer of leather. The leather ends up peeling over time. And it gets really, really annoying. Believe me, I have a few of those agendas that just won't stop peeling. So this, you won't run into the same issue. It's also lightweight, it's thin. But if you are looking for an all leather item, this is not going to be it. So I will, I guess, put this down as a question mark. Not very great. This is just a very cheap feeling material. And before we go into the bottom half of this list, I will just kind of summarize that, again, this is not the greatest leather, but for $35 or maybe $50 for this one, and with this many features and this complicated of a construction, I would say that it's actually pretty good. It's not the best leather, but is it the best leather that I feel like you should expect for something in this price range? Absolutely. I think they're doing a phenomenal job just for being able to make something like this with actual top grain leather for this price. So even though the rankings I give it are, and the scores I give it are quite low, let's just keep that in mind, that this is not an expensive item. So for them to be able to use top grain leather, as they stated on their website, and for it to actually have like a solid feeling and have lined pockets, I think that's absolutely a steal. And now let's move down to stitching. The stitching is pretty well done. I have had multiple ones of these items, and I honestly could not point to anywhere where the stitching is off. So when it comes to kind of like the quality of the stitching, I will give it an A. There, it's an A. I think it's really well done. But when it comes to thread, and the reason why I put stitching and thread on two separate things is because stitching really talks about more how well it's done, the craftsmanship. And the thread, I'm literally talking about the thread they use itself. So if you take a look at the thread, they are very thin. It's to be expected with a light duty, maybe a not actual leather sewing machine, and for this type of really tight stitch. But just talking about raw quality of the thread, I would probably give it a C. I don't know exactly what type of thread it uses, but obviously it's not waxed because sewing machines can't use waxed threads. It's a very thin thread, and I'm almost certain that with time some of them will start to wear off. Just keep that in mind. While in fact I have seen maybe a few kind of ripping off. It doesn't bother me, I just burn it back in. And yeah, so that there's that. Here on this one, you can kind of see the stitching moving inward just a tiny little bit, but I'm not really sure if it's because of the way the stitching is or because of the way my planner in there is sitting. So, and it's also not really a big difference. It's barely noticeable. So I'd say overall stitching quality, great. Now, let's talk about edge finish. The edges on these planners are mostly folded in, so they don't need to actually do any extra edge finish. This is just the one piece of leather that's folded in. Now on the strap and the pen loop, well actually at the bottom of the pen loop, not the top, you can see that they put a very thick edge coat, edge dye on it, as well as on the strap itself. I would say that the edge finish is great, except for if it bugs you on the bookmark. It doesn't actually, no, let me see if I can get it to show better. It doesn't have any edge finish. It's a very, very minor thing. And overall, the edge finish is really good. It doesn't have any spillover onto the actual leather itself. The finish is very smooth, despite there being multiple layers of the leather on the strap. And when it comes to the main body, the folded edge is very clean. So, I will give this a B+. just because these little parts are not finished. But, I mean, who cares? Now, hardware. The only piece of hardware they have on these planners are these snaps. They all come in silver, I believe. And these are, let's just say they're not the best snaps. They are like one of the cheapest snaps you can get. And even though I personally think they set the snaps really well in the slots, it's not gonna fall off anytime soon. Just know that this is not like solid brass or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with them, but they also they're not the best quality snaps you can get. So for that, I'll probably give them a B. It's very, 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 very hard to score anything lower than like a C+, I feel like, in the hardware department, just because of it's mostly coming down to whether it's some kind of alloy, thin material like this or solid brass. And there's really nothing wrong with not using solid brass. I have a preference for them, but that's just me. Okay, so after this, let's talk about how these planners are made. As you can imagine, people may have had some issues with these planners being made in China. However, I will point out that Moterm does have a Facebook group that you can go on, and the actual Moterm people are in the Facebook group. I think they are the ones that are running the Facebook group. And occasionally, I will see them posting updates on new ones that are being made or restocks, blah, blah, blah. And in those posts, they would show some pictures of the planners that are still being made in process. And through those pictures, you can kind of see the working conditions. And honestly, it looks like a pretty great working condition. It's nothing phenomenal, but if you're worried about like sweatshops or anything like that, that's not part of the conversation. They do look like decent working condition. And even though they're made in China, I do believe that Moterm is a small company run by just a small group of people. I think it might have been 17 or something, but don't quote me on that, and the number could be changing. And so really the only thing is kind of like its geographic location. And one of the reasons I believe that they could offer these at such a low price is, first off, these leathers are not expensive compared to the leathers that many other companies use. And two, living cost is just lower in China and many, many other parts of the world compared to Europe and the United States. So they could be paying their employees a decent living wage, but also be able to lower the price just because the living wage is lower over in China than it is here in the US or in the European Union. And like they refer to in their Facebook group, these planners are completely handmade, but I have probably too much to say about planners claiming to be handmade. The truth is, there's not really machine-made leather goods. And if you think about it, there's not really machine-made clothing, fabric, stuff either. And that's part of the reason why with fast fashion and low-priced clothing items and fashion items, there's the whole kind of world of issue with sweatshops, is because there's no really machine alternative to do it. So technically, all leather goods are handmade to varying degrees. And if given how much companies emphasize on handmade, how much people love handmade goods, and it's almost to a point that different companies are using the term handmade to be a kind of form of advertisement. On the back side of this grading sheet, I have a Handmade product scale, and we're gonna go through that. And just to point out, I really try to write big, but I have really small handwriting, so this is really the best I can do. Now, when it comes to cutting, there is the option for for companies to make a metal mold and then just press it down with a machine. Alternatively, they can take a ruler or a template or something and actually hand cut it with a knife. In this case, because of how uniform everything is and the lack of customization options, I would guess that this cutting for the Moterm is not hand cut. One of the good ways to tell if you don't have footage or pictures of their behind the scenes is whether a company offer a lot of customization. If they do, they have to hand cut that because getting the metal molds are actually relatively expensive compared to hand cutting everything, as well as the consistency. It doesn't matter how good somebody can measure things, there's always going to be inconsistencies if they're hand cutting. And so given how consistent their cutting is and how kind of like stable their collection or their designs are, I would guess that it's not hand cut. Assembly, I threw that in there just to illustrate that there's no machine assembly. You have to hand assemble like with a real human. So yes, it is assembled by hand, just because. And by that, I mean, after each individual pieces are cut, it has to be hand glued or taped together for sewing. And I do think that they have released pictures and videos showing that process, and it is hand assembled just as literally everything else out there in the leather planner community. Stitching, this is machine stitched. No question about that. So it's not hand stitched. A fun fact, in the leather goods community, a lot of the times people, when they say handmade leather product, they really just refer to hand stitching because that's where the biggest difference is. And like I said, these are not hand stitched. And when it comes to the stitching methods, it makes sense for them to machine stitch for the type of look they like, because the hand stitching does usually give you a slightly more kind of wild, rugged look. Also, it cuts production cost by so much. And that's part of the reason why I think they're able to offer this at a lower price, is because they don't have to hand stitch everything. And the technical difference between hand stitching and machine stitching, well, there are a lot of differences, but the two main differences is, one, the type of thread that they can use. With hand stitching, usually people use a thicker waxed thread that just holds on better and more resistant to weather effects and blah, blah, blah. But with machine stitching, they could not use a waxed thread, and it's usually a thinner thread that they use. And another difference is the way the threads are put together. In hand stitching, you kind of have this crisscross at kind of like an intersection, like at a hole. And so basically the top and bottom strand of the thread will kind of always be going up and down, up and down. Whereas with machine stitching, it has more of this type of like locking design. So the threads never actually cross over to the other side, which makes it a little bit less sturdy, because if one part of this is ripped, a lot of it could pull out. Whereas with hand stitching, because they cross, if one of these little sections is broken, the friction from when it crosses will still hold the rest of it together. So just keep that in mind. Hardware setting. Basically, the only difference is if they pounded this in with a hammer or if they had a machine to press it down. Realistically, it doesn't make too much of a difference. I will put a question mark here just because I don't know how they're set. With most companies, they do have, it's just more reliable and quicker to have a machine press it down. So I'm guessing that this is machine pressed, but I also don't know for sure. So I'll give it a question mark. Edge finishing. Edge finishing. So there are some devices that you can kind of use to roll your edge finish in. Doesn't matter. I don't know. I don't really know how these are done. They might be done by hand. They might be done by dipping it in something. I really don't know, and it really doesn't make a difference. So I will give it a question mark. Edge burnishing doesn't apply here. It only applies to leathers that are burnishable. So I will basically kind of cross this out for this product. Quality control, again, for leathers, they have to be done by a person. So yeah, it's done by a person. And overall, I'm not going to give it a score, but you can kind of see that this is what I came up with. Yes, it's handmade. Is it 100%, absolutely 100% handmade? No, it's not. But it really doesn't make that big of a difference. The only thing that I think makes the biggest difference is the stitching. It's not hand stitched. But then again, this is $35. And I think it's pretty good for what it is. And now, let's talk about the design. So they have a lot of designs. For example, this one that I think is inspired by Giglio, maybe. They have the more kind of like rugged, original Midori looking traveler's notebooks that are obviously inspired by Midori. These like, I said Hobonichi Weeks. Yeah, these Hobonichi Weeks configuration are a little bit more in line with the original Hobonichi design, especially if you look at the A6, the B6, and the A5. This is a B6. The configuration here, the big back pocket, the kind of card slots on the left-hand side, and the secretarial pocket that looks like this, they are all very, very, very Hobonichi-like. So I would say that they are definitely inspired by a lot of other companies. Is it a dupe? I don't think so, because they never really try to make them look like the other brands. Also, the dimensions of their product is a little bit different from the Hobonichi ones or the Giglio ones. For example, this B6 folio is a lot smaller than the Giglio one, so is the Hobonichi Weeks cover. And a lot of people do complain about how big the Giglio is, and you can't fill it up unless your planner is already chunked up. In which case, you're in luck, because these actually fit to the notebooks a lot better. And so overall, they do not have many original designs, except for maybe like these rulers, but I'm not even sure if they are actually the companies that made them. But just in terms of their more popular products, they're not original. But then again, most traveler's notebooks are taking from Midori, and most folios are taking a little bit from Hobonichi, and that's just kind of the way things are, because these are the two companies that kind of started this trend. And yeah, so I do believe that they are improving on their design. They have, like I mentioned, the Facebook group where the Moterm team will actually listen to feedback from people, and a lot of the times they will ask for customer opinions on things, or what to make, what to design next. They have improved their design a lot. For example, this older version of the Hobonichi Weeks does not have Moterm stamped anywhere on it, whereas this new version has a little Moterm tag just right here. It feels to me, and the new one also, it has double clasps, so that if you chunk it up, you can just keep it a little bit looser so that you can actually still fit your stuff in there. And these are just little things that they have been doing. From what I can tell, this is just my speculation, they started off, maybe, allegedly, they started off making dupes of other famous designs. But once they got more comfortable and once they understood their actual value that they're able to offer to their customers, they became more comfortable making adjustments like adding the double snap and many other changes and adding their own logo actually on their product, since they are, I think, starting to develop their own branding and their own following. I think they're getting more comfortable kind of embracing the Moterm brand and coming up with new things for themselves. The most recent items I bought, which is this and this folio, came with their own branded drawstring dust bag, and these are really high quality dust bags. I really like them. So I have pretty good high hopes for the company. They're really communicative. They are on Facebook. They take people's feedback seriously, and it seems like they are evolving more into their own company rather than just another one of those AliExpress. No shade on anyone, but you all know the stereotype of the dupes, and a lot of them do kind of just violate intellectual property of other companies. But I do think that Moterm is working on making improvements and adjustments based on what's currently out there in the market and really kind of embracing their own identity as a company. So overall, I like Moterm. I do own many other expensive brands like Louis Vuitton, Giglio, VDS. I think there's a place for them. Their leathers are not the best, but for the price, it's a really good deal. And honestly, I prefer my Moterm in many cases over the Giglio just because of the fit. And honestly, I am glad that this company exists. So let me know down in the comments what you thought of this episode. I know the Moterm is a little bit controversial when it comes to planners, especially for the Hobonichi, the Giglio, the vendor spec fans, but I do think that over time this company will grow into something that's similar but definitely unique in their own way, and I can't wait to see how they evolve through this whole process. Well, I just realized that the video cut off, so what I was saying is I can't wait to see what they are able to do in the future. And so that's going to be it for this video for today. Again, if you're interested in seeing more, or if you like this video, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you have any comments about the video or about Moterm, or just pretty much about anything, please leave a comment down below and I will definitely respond to it. And that's going to be it. I will see you next week in my next video. Thanks for watching.